It started with a knock that didn't sound right. Not the easy, neighborly kind that echoed through a screen door on a Sunday afternoon. This was heavier, practiced. 2 sharp raps followed by a pause, then another. It was the kind of knock that didn't wait for permission. And on that day, it came with 2 men standing on his porch in tactical vests, sunglasses, and clipboards that looked more like court orders than community notices. They weren't from the sheriff's office. That much was clear. But they looked close enough. Close enough that if you didn't know better, you'd second-guess yourself. And that was the point. It was all designed to confuse. "Sir," one of them said, "we're here on behalf of the Clear Ridge Homeowners Association. You've been cited for non-compliance. This is your final notice before enforcement proceedings begin." The man stared at them, silent. He owned the land, 147 acres, a family farm passed down through 4 generations. His front gate didn't even open into Clear Ridge. His mailbox was registered under the old township charter. He didn't belong to an HOA. Never had. Never signed anything. He'd fought too hard for this land, and too long to keep it from being swallowed up by the developers that had flattened every ridge between here and the county highway. He asked for identification. The men refused. He told them to get off his land. They didn't move. Then his brother pulled up, Sheriff Luke Callahan, in full uniform, cruiser lights spinning as dust curled behind his tires. The fake officers left without a word, but not before dropping a laminated folder on the porch with a forged letter of intent to seize the property for compliance debt. The date was typed in clean Helvetica. The signatures were scanned and crooked. The seal looked official but bled at the corners like a bad counterfeit. That was how it began. Over the next month, the mailbox became a daily battleground. Notices arrived every other day. Citations for imaginary issues, improper sighting color, unauthorized water use, failure to register livestock. The livestock in question were his own cattle, born and raised under a license he'd held since before Clear Ridge had even been built. He ignored the letters. Then came the warnings. Then the visits. Karen Whitaker showed up next, polite at first, with her white SUV and her clipboard and her tight-lipped smile that never touched her eyes. She wore expensive boots and spoke in slow, clipped phrases, like she was explaining HOA policy to a child. "We're simply bringing order to the area," she said. "We expect all community members to do their part." He told her again, he wasn't part of their community. She handed him a pamphlet titled What It Means to Belong to Clear Ridge. Inside, maps had been redrawn. Boundaries extended. Legal language was fuzzy, but confident. He flipped to the back and saw something that made his stomach drop. His property, outlined in red. That night, he and Luke went through the county records. Something had changed. The digital file for his deed had been updated just 3 weeks earlier. A new notation appeared beside the parcel ID. "Pending compliance review, CRHOA Advisory Committee." It wasn't real. It wasn't legal. But it was enough to confuse a clerk. That was the trick. Not to steal land in broad daylight, but to shift the paper trail just enough to make resistance look like non-compliance. It was war through bureaucracy. They started digging. Within days, Luke uncovered that Karen's HOA had been filing similar notices to landowners along the perimeter of the Clear Ridge subdivision. A dozen farms. Some already sold. Some lost through technicalities. A few tied up in court. One couple, both in their 70s, had moved into an apartment after compliance liens drained their savings through legal fees. That's when he realized this wasn't about beautification. It was a land grab. A long game. A calculated effort to expand the reach of a fraudulent HOA, backed by forged deeds, corrupted zoning files, and hired compliance enforcers who wore tactical vests and carried radios that only broadcast static. At night, he began hearing things. Vehicles driving slowly past the outer fence. Drones hovering silently over the barn roof. Tools moved. Gates left open. One morning, a portion of the irrigation line had been slashed. Another time, the fuel tanks were left uncapped, half empty by morning. It was sabotage. But worse than the damage was the betrayal. One of his own ranch hands, a man he'd hired a year ago, had been feeding information to Karen. Photographs. Schedules. Storage layouts. He found a small camera rig hidden inside the hayloft, wired to a transmitter buried beneath the floorboards. He fired the man on the spot. That night, he sat on the porch with a shotgun across his lap, waiting for headlights that never came. Leah joined him after midnight, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "They're trying to wear you down," she said. "They won't," he replied. "This land's not theirs to take." But inside, he wondered, not whether they'd win, but whether he'd lose something bigger in the fight. His sense of peace, his home soul, the old barn that still smelled like his grandfather's work gloves. There were things on that land no court filing could replace. The week after the attempted arson was heavy with the smell of burned pine and scorched plastic. He'd managed to put out the flames before they reached the hay stores, but the damage to the outer shed was more than physical. It had altered the space. What was once just another part of the farm, a tool room, a feed store, had become a mark, a symbol. They didn't just try to damage his property. They tried to set fire to his history. Leah took it hard. She didn't show it in loud ways. She didn't weep or yell or demand they move. But something in her movements changed. She moved slower in the mornings. Checked the locks twice instead of once. Stopped humming while she cooked. It wasn't fear exactly. It was exhaustion. The long toll of being under siege, even in silence. He knew that feeling. It was the same one that haunted soldiers. The one that didn't let you sleep even when the shooting stopped. So he fought back the only way he knew how. He dug deeper. Every night, he sat with Luke and Mia in the den, maps and records spread across the table. They built timelines, charted overlapping shell companies, mapped where each false citation had landed and when. They used red string. They laughed at themselves for doing it. But it worked. A pattern emerged. Almost every farm targeted had a common feature: water access, acreage within 30 miles of planned highway expansions, or proximity to utility corridors. It wasn't random. It was speculative encroachment, saw theft. The HOA, under Karen's direction, had acted like the frontline shock troops. Their citations were designed not to correct behavior, but to destabilize ownership, to frighten, pressure, and eventually push people into surrendering their land rights for amicable compliance resolutions. These resolutions were packaged legal forfeitures, and they'd almost pulled it off. That night, as he stared at the chart with its colored lines and annotated notes, he asked the question that had been sitting on his chest since the first fake notice arrived. How many people don't know they're being stolen from? Mia looked up, her face tight. Too many. Underscore 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 underscore. He decided to go public, not just in the courtroom, not just in private meetings. He went to the County Agricultural Forum, an annual gathering of landowners, irrigation district managers, ranch supply vendors. He asked for a 5-minute speaking slot. They gave him 15. He didn't bring exhibits. He brought the folder. The original forged citation. The edited HOA jurisdiction map. The fire marshal's report. The photo of the silhouette caught on the hidden camera during the arson attempt. He told them what happened. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But clearly. This was my family's land. Still is. But for 3 months, someone else pretended they owned it. Not with guns, not with threats, but with forms, citations, stamps, and fake laws. And that almost worked. When he was done, the room was silent. Then someone stood. Then another. He didn't know what they were doing at first. Then he realized they were raising their hands. Waiting to speak. Waiting to share their own stories. That night, he didn't leave the room until 2 a.m. and the next morning, the first copy of the Landowner's Legal First Aid Kit went live online. The ripple effect of that single speech turned into something he hadn't expected. Movement. Not a protest, not a lawsuit, not a flash in the pan, but a long, slow burn of awareness. A fire in the minds of people who'd once believed land was safe just because it had been in the family for generations. They wrote in from across the state. Some just wanted to talk. Others were already under attack and didn't realize it. One man sent a copy of a compliance notification from an HOA that didn't even exist in public records. It had been stapled to his barn door. I thought it was junk mail, he wrote. But they started showing up in person now. That phrase stuck with him. They started showing up in person now. It mirrored exactly what had happened to him. The citations. Then the clipboard carriers. Then the fake cops. Then the sabotage. It was a pipeline, and they were tracking it. He and Mia started coordinating with a small team of pro bono legal researchers, most of them former clerks or county-level bureaucrats disillusioned by what they'd seen. They created a referral network, a hotline, a rotating file of verified signatures, and stamp overlays that could catch forgeries from a glance. The work was tedious, but it was real, and while he was building this new web of defense, life on the farm quietly began to recover. The old gate was replaced. The new one was heavier, iron instead of pine. The barn's south wall was rebuilt with fire-resistant siding. Walt helped install a live feed weather station on the silo, which doubled as a motion detector system. Leah smiled more. Not every day, but more. She baked cornbread for the farmhands again. Planted new lavender rows near the mailbox. It wasn't a return to the past. It was something new. Something built on lessons learned. Underscore 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 underscore. Then a letter arrived, not from an HOA, not from Clear West Holdings, not even from the county. It came from a developer in a bordering state, and signed, no return address. Inside was a folded parcel map. His property, highlighted in red, labeled Target Lot. Beneath that, 3 words. You delayed it. He stared at the paper for a long time. Not afraid. Not even angry. Just confirmed. They weren't gone. They just shifted tactics. Karen was in jail, sure, but the playbook hadn't been buried with her. Others were still running it. In other counties. Other states. And they were watching him now, not as a victim, but as an obstacle. So, he doubled down. He printed the map and pinned it to the inside of the barn. Not in fear, but as a reminder that for every foot of land left unguarded, there were vultures waiting to call it theirs. And he wasn't finished. Not yet. He didn't tell Leah about the map right away. Not because he was hiding it. Because he wanted a moment, just one, to breathe without threat. To drink his coffee without deciphering legalese or decoding veiled warnings. But she saw the folded letter on the table the next morning and read it silently. They're still watching, she said. They always were. She folded the paper again. So what now? Now we teach others to see them coming. That was the turning point, not in the battle, but in his purpose. Before, he had reacted. He had defended what was his. But now, he was something else entirely. A signal flare for others who hadn't yet been attacked. He set up monthly workshops. Quiet, invitation-only sessions hosted in barns, fire halls, and feed stores. They went over the red flags, ambiguous property surveys, rapid zoning changes, fine print on annexation notices. The meetings grew, from 4 people to a dozen to standing room only. He started writing, too, not for publication, but for clarity. Short entries. Case studies. Pages he could hand to a landowner on their first visit. Each one had the same message beneath every paragraph. Your land is yours, until the paperwork says it isn't. Don't wait for that day. The network grew. Mia secured funding for a formal nonprofit status. Luke helped create a template for training rural deputies on HOA impersonation tactics. They even partnered with a university law clinic, which assigned third-year students to review historical property encroachment cases. And still, his phone buzzed at odd hours. Someone just drove by taking photos of our easement. I found a citation with no address on it, just my GPS coordinates. I think they're trying to rezone my field without notifying me. Every story chipped away at the myth that land couldn't be stolen without force. Every call reinforced the truth that the battleground had shifted from fences and courtrooms to digital filings and forged seals. But he wasn't afraid of them anymore. Because now, when he looked across his pasture, he didn't just see grass and cattle. He saw what they were really after. Permanence. The kind you couldn't buy. The kind you couldn't forge. The kind that was written in sweat, in stories, in soil passed hand to hand across generations. Underscore 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 underscore. When spring came, he dug a new post hole at the southern border of the property. Not because the fence was damaged, but because he wanted to set a new corner. A new beginning. He placed a marker there, iron, grounded in concrete. No plaque. No message, just a line drawn in full view of the horizon, and as he stepped back, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked at the farmhouse in the distance, he realized something. They could fake maps, they could forge deeds, they could mimic uniforms and copy signatures, but they couldn't replace a man who knew where his line was, and dared them to try and cross it again. The days following the courtroom reckoning passed with a stillness that didn't feel quite real. No more HOA letters. No more clipboard men pacing his fence line. No late-night vehicle rumblings, no sabotage, no shadows outside the barn. But for him, quiet had stopped meaning peace. It meant pause. He knew these people didn't operate like storms. They operated like rot. Quiet, creeping, structural. Karen may have been removed from the board and booked, but what she was part of, the machinery behind her, hadn't gone anywhere. The land was safe for now. The sheriff's patrols continued their sweeps, and the farmhands were back to hauling hay instead of checking camera feeds. But he wasn't fooled. And he wasn't done. He spent the first few mornings alone in the West Field, walking rows that once had been targeted for redevelopment by Clear West Holdings. The development firm had quietly withdrawn its filings, but his attorney confirmed they still held interest in the surrounding parcels. He could feel them out there, waiting, planning, watching through boardrooms and subcontractors. Trying to redraw the same map Karen had failed to push through. He walked past the fence line and into the grove where his grandfather once built the original irrigation wheel. A few pieces of the steel frame still lay rusted in the grass. He reached down and turned a piece over in his hand, remembering the way his grandfather used to say, "Don't just build something strong. Build it so it can't be unmade by a lie." It wasn't just a fence line he defended. It was truth. And now, with Karen's empire crumbling, he realized the next phase of resistance wouldn't be legal. It would be cultural. Underscore 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 underscore. The community that once watched from behind blinds now watched with open eyes. Neighbors stopped by again, some with pies, others with questions. Most were humble, a few ashamed. Several had received citations too, but paid out of fear or confusion. Others had backed Karen early on, believing her talk of preserving values and community elevation. One man, George Trask, a retired surveyor, stood awkwardly at the barn door with his hat in hand. "I helped draft one of those HOA boundary extensions," George said, barely above a whisper. "Didn't know what they were for. Thought it was just streamlining paperwork." The man looked shaken, older than he did 6 months ago. "I burned it," he said, "after I saw what they did to you." The homeowner nodded, clapped the man's shoulder once, and said nothing more. It wasn't about revenge. It was about memory. And making sure people didn't forget how close they'd come to losing something that couldn't be replaced by square footage or subdivision signage. Underscore 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 underscore. By late summer, the state attorney general launched a formal inquiry into HOA abuse and land fraud in rural counties. His story had opened the floodgates. Local stations picked it up, then regional outlets. By fall, he was speaking at a joint panel on property rights in Jefferson City. He hated every second of it. The microphones, the stage lights, the suits sitting with pens poised over notepads. They wanted him to give them a soundbite. Something that fit in a report. He gave them the truth instead. "They didn't come with bulldozers," he said. "They came with paper. With seals and stamps and envelopes marked final notice. They came with the language of order, but the intention of conquest." A silence fell in the room, and then a slow nod from one of the attorneys. "What saved you?" someone asked. He thought for a long moment before answering. "My brother. A good sheriff. A family barn full of documentation. And the fact that I didn't back down just because their lies looked official." He didn't consider himself a fighter, not in the way people meant when they said it at town meetings or in interviews. He was a farmer. A man with his hands in the soil, not someone who wrote speeches or shook hands under camera lights. But the fight had found him. And now, more and more people were asking for help. They sent letters, hundreds of them, from Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, and down through the Texas Panhandle. All from people like him. Ranchers, widows, veterans, families living on land their grandparents had fenced in with cedar posts long before anyone thought to subdivide it. They had stories, too, of mysterious liens, backdated zoning changes, code violations issued by men with forged badges and real guns. They wanted to know what he did, how he did it, and whether they had time to do the same. He couldn't answer them all. But he read every one. And then he and Mia got to work. They built something called Red Line Watch. It wasn't flashy, just a shared legal archive, a hotline number, and a state-by-state map showing which counties had reported known HOA overreach. It became a kind of underground railroad for landowners, rural resistance organized by faxes, printed deeds, county charter reviews, and the old-fashioned power of neighbor-to-neighbor trust. Walt helped install satellite Wi-Fi at the far end of the property to power their encrypted server. His niece, a former paralegal, volunteered to vet filings from new members. Luke added a law enforcement training brief to distribute to rural deputies who might one day face compliance enforcement officers that weren't real cops, but played the part well enough to intimidate a working man with dust on his boots. This was how they fought back now, not with rifles or protests, but with facts. With sunlight. And still, some tried again. A former HOA vice chair from Karen's old board submitted a petition to resurrect a land management cooperative with non-governance stewardship guidelines. It wasn't illegal, but it was a thinly veiled attempt to reassert control. This time, however, the community was ready. 39 neighbors attended the vote. The measure failed unanimously. Fall brought harvest, colder mornings, and a sense that the war had shifted permanently. He still carried the weight of it, the fatigue, the fury, but it had changed shape. It was no longer about survival. It was about stewardship. He gave a short talk at a state agricultural co-op meeting in October, where someone asked him what he believed the real threat had been. He paused. Bureaucracy without humanity, he said finally. People who write laws like they're blueprints for cages. People who think ownership is just a title and a stamp. But it's not. It's memory. And that's the part they didn't understand. That answer stayed with him longer than he expected. One weekend, he took the old wooden sign down from the barn door. The one that had hung crooked for 20 years. He sanded it, restained it, and etched 4 words across the back in neat, black paint. This land remembers everything. He rehung it the next morning. Leah watched from the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, steam rising from her mug. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. They had both lived it, and now they were keeping it alive. Winter arrived slower than expected, and for once, it didn't feel like a threat. The cold that rolled over the hills wasn't the kind that numbed. It was clean. Quiet. Reflective. The land rested beneath it. So did he. Not because the fight was over, but because the land had been defended. And not just with cameras, citations, or lawyers. With memory. With grit. With truth. He walked the fence line one last time before the first snow. It had held, strong, repaired, reinforced. Just like everything else. He paused by the old gate. The hinge still squeaked. He left it that way. It was part of the story now. The barn was warmer than it used to be. They'd added insulation in October, put up new shelves, brought in a filing cabinet salvaged from the county courthouse. That cabinet now held hundreds of pages, legal decisions, deed histories, testimony transcripts. He kept the original forged citation in the very back. Not as a trophy. As a warning. He still got letters. Calls. Sometimes even visitors. One was a former HOA manager from Kansas who drove 4 hours just to say, "You stopped the whole damn thing from happening in my county." The man handed him a worn copy of the Red Line Watch Toolkit, its pages dog-eared and underlined. "We didn't just use your strategy," the man said. "We followed your courage." He didn't know how to respond to that. So he offered coffee. The sheriff's office confirmed 2 new investigations into similar land acquisition schemes, this time in counties where real estate values had surged due to incoming tech campuses. It was the same pattern: stealth annexation, zoning confusion, phony violations, harassment disguised as process. But now, they knew how to spot it. They knew how to fight it. And he had become more than a survivor. He had become a node. A point of resistance in a network built not with passwords and algorithms, but with fences, handshakes, notarized copies, and quiet determination. He didn't set out to be that. But he didn't turn away from it either. Leah once called him a reluctant anchor. He liked that. On Christmas Eve, they gathered with neighbors in the old barn, which now doubled as a community hall. Someone brought soup. Someone else set up folding chairs. They hung lanterns from the beams, lit by battery packs, and old farm ingenuity. At the back of the room stood the plaque he had carved months earlier, leaning against the wall. This land remembers everything. He thought about what that meant now. It meant Karen. The forged deeds. The burned shed. But it also meant his grandfather's initials on the wall. The letters from other landowners saved by his story. The cold mornings. The courtroom silence. The cattle births. The protest that never needed to happen because truth stood its ground. He stood quietly, as his neighbor sang an old hymn. He didn't sing. He just listened. And when the wind rose up outside, brushing across the beams like a sigh through pine, he knew the land was listening too.